Hello everyone. Let's get started with our webinar covering the topic of data strategies and prioritization. But today we decided to focus on one of the most important parts of filling out a data strategy, which is the process of prioritizing your projects. Many businesses, they think that they need to build a full data strategy once they identify a few efforts, initiatives to put into place. We do not agree with this statement, but we believe that it's important to have procedures, to have processes, to prioritize your initiatives. And as you go in this iterative process with experiments, you start to build capacity, capabilities, teams, and so on. So we are going to look at the interaction between the strategy that supports the overall business strategy and your isolated initiatives that you want to make them to happen at scale later on. So first of all, let's take a look at some of the skills that are currently being in most demand by companies. And this helps us to understand a bit about why we have so many companies hiring data strategists, and other professionals that are able to lead these initiatives in companies. This list here reflects a lot of the situation that is happening right now. Companies are mainly hiring people that are able to perform those steps of data analysis that you probably know, the descriptive, the predictive, and the prescriptive. And you can see here that the role of predictions, more advanced analytics, is present as well. It's a huge combination of engineering skills and also the ability of finding out how to match a specific business problem with a specific proof of concept coming from data. You want to do that to reduce your costly mistakes. Data does not only help the company to find out new insights to improve products and internal processes, but also the assumption, the hypothesis is that those decision makers, those people making recurrent decisions, they will reduce the error, the false positives, the false negatives, all those costly mistakes that might be putting the business into a fragile situation. Having that in mind, it's important for us to review something that we always repeat in our webinars. This is not an outbreak. This is happening especially because we have this transition at the moment between a digital transformation and a more data and analytics transformation process. If the companies, they already work with digital processes, it means that they are also able to collect data strategically, not necessarily with quality, but the fact is that they can monitor processes and products, even customer journeys, end to end, in a way that we can use this data, monetize it to create new features and to personalize the services even more. In this sense, we not only deal with the fact that the labor force nowadays is searching for ways to increase data literacy, but also companies are trying to find people to build this kind of data team, not necessarily centralized, but spread in different departments. You need to have those data people, those people that are able to take information and to make it useful for decision making. We like to use this term, make data useful, because it's not the same as making it used. It means that data has a purpose that is that we can easily identify in the specific journey of the business. So we like to highlight these bottlenecks. For example, if you consider that the purpose of data is to support the decision makers on the right side of this, let's call it data pipeline, you really want to care about this intersection here in which you have your core data wranglers interacting with the line of business. And here is where we identified this big problem, the so-called last mile problem, Many projects, they die here, not because they were badly prioritized, but because they were badly communicated to the business. And prioritization mainly happens here when we are still trying to figure out which type of proof of concept, what type of area of data science we are going to use to create a solution for a specific business problem. And therefore, we need to have these people that are able to perform the steps of data analysis, the descriptive, the predictive, and the prescriptive, and later on ship this as an experiment, as a proof of concept to be tested and put into production. So having these are the two main bottlenecks that companies face nowadays in their data pipeline. What we are going to do today, one of the outcomes of this webinar is that you are going to understand much better what are the criteria that you should use to prioritize which projects to put in place here that use somehow data that is available, and also what are the items, the factors that you need to consider to have a good relationship with the stakeholders, to the audience that is going to consume this information later on, the end decision makers. We like to work not with specific roles like the analyst, the data scientist, or the data engineer. These are important to map skills, but when it comes to looking at your landscape, your environment, we like to look at stakeholder personas. These are the ways that people contribute to your data culture. Let's put it this way. So you have your data wranglers, those people that are inside the box, producing the proof of concepts, engineering the pipelines. Doesn't matter if the company is small or large, you need to have some people that are able to put this in place, even one or two individuals that they can collaborate with the line of business. Then you have the translators. It's important to have some decision makers or some people that are also skilled in analytics to be able to explain, to be able to take a business question and transform it into a hypothesis, and later on make it analytical to finally present this to the rest of the business so everyone is aligned. Again, here you can see that these translators, they are extremely helpful for removing those bottlenecks that we talked before, the problem solution fit and the last mile. Finally, you also need people that they have some kind of financial and psychological influence. The ambassadors, they just need to understand a bit about the proof of concepts. They don't need to build or necessarily evaluate anything, but they are extremely important also to support the culture, especially because they are able to influence others and mitigate the occurrence of avoiders in your teams as well. In our methodology, once we map these three types of stakeholders, the people that are going to help with the prioritization of those projects, especially the wranglers and the translators, we like to highlight that even the ambassadors, they need to be able to develop some of the proof of concepts related to data. They need to know the metrics. They need to understand a bit about cloud services so they can actually contribute to this ecosystem within the company. This doesn't mean that they need to engineer, to build things up, but it's a very good way to exercise at least once in a classroom or in a personal training, so you get much more confident and you trust the kind of things that you are helping the company to implement. Most of the demystification happens here, also when the ambassadors are feeling like contributors as well. One thing that business leaders have to unlearn, as we say here at Growth Tribe, is that, and this has been generating a lot of discussion on LinkedIn, even with people that helped to build this data maturity frameworks or models 10 years ago, is the fact that because most of these data maturity models look like an ascending path, business leaders very frequently interpret them as a step-by-step procedure. Imagine like in a project, a waterfall approach, that you have a first phase that you would clean and engineer all the infrastructure. Then you would start doing some analytics, perhaps some predictive modeling later on. And then as you grow more and more complex projects, you also add more value to the company. We do not agree with this statement. This is actually not what the models try to convey in the past, but because of the way they are drawn with this ascending path, it makes business leaders to have a misleading view of what actually building data maturity ends up being. So we prefer to identify these paths, these ascending paths, as misleading because we usually prefer an iterative process. So it means that you do need to find pilot projects to create some momentum, and then you are going to build these capabilities as you go. It's a very interesting discovery process. First of all, because as you identify the key business questions that you can solve with these projects to improve the processes, you will also discover what type of data you have to store. It's very interesting to realize that if you think about that ascending path, it usually points to the company that all the data needs to be organized and you need to have a data lake or a data warehouse, but you don't know yet, if you haven't ran some experiments or some pilot projects, what type of data you have to store. If it's mostly your CRM or top of the funnel or your referrals or your retention data. And these things you only learn once you start to experiment, and then you are able to implement. Once you have these projects going on, you also understand what types of profiles of contributors you have to hire, especially the data wranglers. You will look at your infrastructure, if you have enough on-premise, in-premise, or cloud infrastructure to do that. And you also will probably have to think about ways to increase trust or how you secure the access to that data for different roles in the organization as well. So it's a very complex process. That's why the iterative, small size, controlled implementation of these projects is extremely important, but we haven't talked about prioritization yet. So in order to put this into motion and go, let's say, from a more data-aware situation to where you want to go, your North Star, a data-informed situation, you'll probably have to go through many iteration processes. And you want to do that because you also will do in a low cost or the minimum cost as possible, implementing step by step this infrastructure, also to control your exposure to a fragile situation. As I said, this webinar will be mostly about the left side of the iteration, the strategy, and we are going to focus on the specific parts related to projects. But what you need to always remember here is that the data strategy is not an isolated strategy. In order to make it successful, it should be strictly linked to the business strategy. For many things, including psychological effects that it has on the teams. People feel that this is actually aligned with what the company's purpose and the values and everything else. The other thing is that you can see it as a very good first step for prioritizing any other project in the company, considering that data is a crucial factor in the growth of the company. We like to draw this into two dimensions. We see that many companies, they are now focused on one side or the other. Typically the retailers, for example, they are very focused on personalization at scale. They try to find initiatives that they will create new products, new features, especially for marketing campaigns as well, that will generate revenue. But we also know that there are many companies in supply chain, in healthcare, for example, hospitals, that they will use data to make faster diagnostic or prognostic, especially mitigating risks and trying to reduce costs, with the same kind of budget or time allocation, have a higher number of people being covered in the system. So we use this depiction here in order to show that you have different projects that can be allocated in distinct areas, even hybrid formats. For example, the banks, after they started to compete with the fintechs, they had to move from a more defensive aspect of their data strategy. Before, they were mainly using data to do better credit scoring or detect fraud. And nowadays, they became much more proactive, even offering personalization, not only to the prime clients, but nowadays to the public via the digital channels of the app. So this is a very good first step for a strategist, for a business leader, to understand how the data supports the overall strategy. You are using it because you are going to mitigate these costly mistakes in the decision-making process to optimize or more customer-facing applications, or to optimize internal processes as well. And this has been summarized by Bill Schmartzel, because it is one of the most important skills for business leaders. They, of course, need to understand and be able to evaluate these projects, but mainly they are helping here to identify, to match a specific business problem with a solution coming from data, and this is very much linked with the business strategy as well. Once you get a bit familiar with the areas of analytics that help companies to improve their overall business strategy, you realize that there is a number of possibilities. And actually, for those companies that strategically take the first steps, the problem they face is that they seem to have too many use cases. And by having too many use cases, you run a big risk, a fragility risk, that ends up promoting curiosities. As you have data, as you have teams to perform these projects, your decision makers, they might get curious about simple questions that are not necessarily linked to a metric, not necessarily linked to a core effort that the company wants to put into place. So that's why we highlight in this very simple, you probably saw this many times, prioritization matrix, but when it comes to data, it's extremely important to stay away from the curiosities and only work on them on a case by case. And you really need to create this skill in your decision makers, in your ambassadors, the ability to find out what are the key business questions that can be supported by data. Obviously, you do this for every project, but specifically for data, the characteristics that differentiate data projects from IT projects, you need to look at key business questions. You need to avoid early failures, especially because imagine you are trying to put the data culture into motion. So differently from IT projects that we already use IT initiatives, projects, product development, in data we need to be more careful because most of the companies now, they are in that phase that is being validated by the community within the company. And that's why it's important to figure out here what's key and also try to work on the success of these implementations. Here we have these two general domains. What I from experience, identified in terms of items that you can use to, for example, measure how beneficial a project is one, recurrency. So a useful way to find out a key business question is simply to ask your decision makers what are the most frequent decisions they make, and also in a kind of analytic profile, write down the data sources, the dashboards, the metrics that they look at to make that decision. And in this case, you will have a second factor. A key business question usually already have a performance metric, a KPI that is already in place and people understand it quite well. So if you are able to find recurrent questions or decisions and map them to this key business metric, you probably have a good indicator that it's also going to be extremely beneficial. And then you can consider the costs, the complexity for implementation as well. The other two things that can complement this thinking is whether it's predictive. So most of the key business questions today, they are not only related to analytics, simple dashboarding and so on, but also they help these decision makers with a score, with a recommendation, with a propensity to buy or a propensity to churn. And this facilitates decision making because it's a single number, not a group or a set of other data sources that decision maker needs to look at to make a purely human decision. We support decision making with these recommendations and with these propensities and so on. Obviously, the last one, the fourth thing that you can consider to map your key business questions is whether they are being put into place by your competitors. You don't want to let this situation happen. It means that you are just adapting to your industry, but you need to consider that if your industry is evolving using data, you also need to put this as a key business question, specifically because it will help you to catch up with the competition. So recurrency, having a metric, being predictive, and being adaptive are the four factors that probably will help you to map your key business questions as well. I like to also draw this in a more design thinking way because we see that one of the mistakes companies are doing is that they could prioritize well, they could have a good problem solution fit, but then they don't consider the audience. The decision maker, the end user who will consume this information coming from data is a human, like our consumers, like our clients, and therefore these products, they need to be kind of designed based on their desired interface. So when it comes to data, most of this information will be in the form of reports or visualizations. And this end user here in the line of business is the person that has needs and goals to make this decision making, and we want to reverse engineer this process in a way that we care about the interface. Probably you will have to do some usability tests. You will have to do some customer interviews, having the customer here as this internal stakeholder, the decision maker that makes the decisions using data. And after that, you have your core data wranglers. They are the ones that go and grab the data from the storage, the data warehouse. They would like to have a community to interact, a community of practice to mitigate these costly mistakes in the decision making and also be more confident when building this proof of concepts. But this is not a whole data pipeline from end to end. Here I'm just zooming in the last steps for you to see that the most important figure here is the end consumer of this information. So every time you are going to also make a checklist for how your project is going to be presented, you need to look at the interfaces that this person here at the end of the chain is going to, it desires to see the information as well. People in your organization will ask you examples. Why do we use data in this kind of environment? And one of the analogies I like to use is the analogy of a doctor. A doctor is a typical decision maker, pressured by time and costs. And traditionally, we provide this human with a set of summaries, the patient's exam results, and some social demographic information. And we trust that the years of education and practice that this doctor acquired before will make him or her able to make a correct diagnostic or a prognostic. So here we have lots of potential false positives, false negatives, but mainly what the main thing that this doctor is performing is a prediction. A diagnostic or a prognostic is nothing different from other decisions that are made every day over and over in businesses, but the doctor here is consuming the information that is coming, let's say, in a descriptive way from the exam results, these printed scales and results of your heart rate, your cholesterol, and so on. And later on, this doctor is also responsible for making a prescription to tell the patients what to do. So going from left to right helps us to understand a lot about how data is consumed in business as well. You have the descriptive summaries, all those KPIs, sales, evolution, everything that already happened, and there is no uncertainty. You're just plotting the evolution of these metrics over time. This is descriptive analytics. And when it comes to data nowadays in companies, this is where companies are mainly situated. What is becoming cheaper, more accessible, is this middle part. Predictions have become much cheaper in the last few years due to the occurrence of cheaper computing power, the algorithms being open source, and companies being more able to collect all kinds of data, structured and unstructured as well. And finally, if you are able to even create those scores, recommendations, you can create a system that helps these humans to make prescriptions to the business as well. All the A/B tests, all the validation experiments, they also happen here because you can even infer causal effects, what actually changes your growth rate based on a change in a specific process or product. Okay, so having this in mind, we see that the most traditional industries, they already use analytics a lot, finance, marketing, Google Analytics, the dashboards, specifically because they are feeding these humans with these summaries of past information. And this is where we want to go beyond. Analytics is just reflecting what happened in the past. It is important to have all this data aggregated so your analysts, they don't need to go to different systems and take notes to then make a decision or to put in a single spreadsheet. Your decision makers, they have all the information in a single dashboard, but you want to go beyond analytics. And this is what the consultants are calling nowadays as advanced analytics. So when, for example, you support this doctor here with extra information going beyond those simply descriptions of the exam results, we say that some recommendations, propensities, and prescriptions are being suggested here. For example, in the case of the doctor, even the medicine that and the treatment that the patient is going to do to get cured or to treat the disease are identified. And in business, it's the same. It's basically building capabilities that help you to be predictive and also to validate your ideas with causality, for example, in a more prescriptive way. This slide has a lot of information, but basically what you need to understand here is that if you perform analytics in the traditional sense, you are just not dealing with uncertainty. You are just plotting information from the metrics, their evolution over time. you are not actually managing or dealing with uncertainty. Just having analytics in place might be even detrimental, because if you have more information in this format, your decision maker might even get confused, because there are so many metrics to look at that the person even makes more mistakes. So to handle that, this has been documented in many behavioral studies. We need to create single scores, propensities, and this is what we build with, for example, machine learning, when we have a score, or when we have hypotheses being tested and understood by the decision maker using an A/B test, for example. Therefore, the advanced analytical skills are here: statistical inference and machine learning. Not surprisingly, companies are hiring in data engineers, data scientists, because they help companies to build proof of concepts in other two areas. But then, it's not enough to just have an engineer or a data scientist, because there's a lot of project management involved, and also stakeholder management. And here's where the business leader can have a good contribution. If you understand that data projects are nothing more than a trial to try to solve a specific business question with a solution coming from data. But the business leaders are not only responsible for removing the blockers for these things to happen, they also need to help the company to find out these intersections, what is feasible to be solved with data. Do not exaggerate, try to solve everything, for example, with artificial intelligence. There are many simple proof of concepts that help you to solve your business problem. They also need to find out which ones they have a return on investment, therefore they are profitable. And more recently, the business leaders also need to understand what is ethical to be done, or how this kind of project contributes to our governance. It seems that when it comes to decision making, if you use data or an automated system, the public, the consumers, they might overreact to specific mistakes compared to when these mistakes were made by a human. So they overreact to the mistakes of machines versus the humans. And the business leaders, they need to have this into their radar and help the company to prioritize based on that as well. Here, again, we might have a lot of information. We discussed this in our trainings, in our courses, to make you capable to understand this, but in very simple terms, to refer to how analytics contributes, you just need to consider, if you don't have a business question yet, you just need to feed your decision makers with analytics. Evolution of metrics, what is the state right now, what is the churn rate, what is the referral rate, customer lifetime value, number of anomalies, frauds detected, and so on. Keep doing that until the moment that they use these insights to come up with a key business question. And once we arrive here, we can then map these projects to those that they do not have any uncertainty. Then we just go back to analytics. For example, if you want to decide who to promote, very frequently companies, they just look at performance from the previous year. You don't need advanced analytics in this case. You just need to have numbers about the targets and the achievements, and then you are able to promote. So no uncertainty, go back to analytics. If there is uncertainty, then you need to be careful, because you cannot just use analytics to manage risk. If you want to manage risk and mitigate costly mistakes, you actually need to be able to engage into machine learning and statistical inference. There are many things that you can do here, but among them in statistical inference, the typical A/B test, just to test before you scale up changes in your website, in your products, your user interfaces, and machine learning for personalization, for predictions, for the scores, recommendations, and so on. We can look at this problem from the other perspective. If you keep deciding about uncertain events, things that involve risk, that you would need an estimate just with analytics, you are also exposing the company to a fragile situation. We call this the analytics chasm. Companies, they have a hard time adding capabilities related to statistical inference and machine learning to their skill sets, but they keep trying to answer uncertain and risky questions with just analytics. And this is one of the things that managers, they need to have in mind, that when you don't add these capabilities to your team, you are also making a decision, the decision to manage uncertainty by simply ignoring it. More related to the engineering part, let's say the operationalization part, one of the costly mistakes that business leaders might do is to confuse a data project with an IT project. And this is relevant for the prioritization phase, because in data, most of the time, what you want to build is an infrastructure that will help you to answer many business questions. The same one, but in a recurrent way. So that's why we have this idea of the pipeline, updating the data sources almost in real time or in a frequent fashion as well. Simply because as soon as an analysis is made, it starts to expire. And you want to have this support decision-making in a way that the information is also updated. So while in IT, the urgency is about, for example, updating a software, in data, it is to have the information in a live fashion being given to the end user, to the decision maker. Considering that, we have a very typical situation in business that is called the Orphan Analytics. This is when you have potentially a key business question. Let's say it's not even a curiosity, but all the infrastructure that is built to this project is not reused. And in this case, when you do not remove this situation of the Orphan Analytics, you are not profiting from the fact that the more you use this infrastructure, the more likely you are going to flatten your marginal costs. The next use case that you generate will have at most the same cost as the previous one, if not decreasing marginal costs. And this happens also because the ambassadors they don't understand very much how data is different, so they put pressure on the data teams to generate revenues and return in the first year or in the first 18 months. But most of this convexity in the economic value of data comes from reusing the same infrastructure for the previous use cases. So having version control, repositories, sharing the same data warehouse, data lake for a number of projects that will come in the future. And this is the attribution of the leaders. The successful leaders, the ones that promote the culture, not to promote a culture per se because it's beautiful and romantic, but because it's going to have an economic impact. But only when this infrastructure is used at scale and people learn to reuse it as well. So for now, you saw that we have this ecosystem with data wranglers, the translators and the ambassadors. But let's say you don't have yet a number of people that are interested in data in the whole company or even in a department. So your number 0, the person that needs to be there to start this process, is a decision maker. But this decision maker needs to be data informed. I like to use this term data informed differently from data driven, because when you say data driven, it seems that data is determining the decision, but actually here we are using the data as a subsidy for reducing the number of costly mistakes, elevating the quality of the insights that this decision maker makes. And I like to put this decision maker here in terms of skills between the data analyst and the domain expert. This person needs to be a bit more analytical than the typical domain expert. So this person needs to be able to understand metrics and do the problem solution fit, present results to other stakeholders, and needs to be a bit more business savvy than the data analysts. The data analysts are already business savvy very frequently. That's why they might be a good candidate as well to be the data educated decision maker in a promotion, for example. Here I've listed, and you can take a screenshot if you want, not only with, let's say, theoretical examples, but here are some sentences that I've collected that I frequently see data-educated decision makers saying. So you can see that they are able to identify when a business question is recurrent, so they request a dashboard. They want to validate new propositions with an A/B test. They look at how to validate their personas with observational data coming from customers. They validate their gut feeling personas with some kind of data-informed personas, and so on. So by looking at these sentences here, you get a sense of the mood or the type of stakeholder that this person might be in a company, driving the efforts as well. Another book that we are big fans here at Growth Tribe from last year is this one, Building Analytics Teams, from John Thompson. I had the opportunity to interview him. And one of the big learnings from his book is that once you have these decision makers, the company is already practicing some of those projects with good prioritization, you need to stimulate the healthy peer review. This is one of the most efficient ways to reduce the costly mistakes that we were talking about, simply because it's very complex. If you look at the number of skills that are necessary to perform data analysis, you have these three big umbrellas here: analytics, statistical inference, and machine learning that we covered. Within them, you have a number of micro proof of concepts. Sometimes projects, they need more than one. You need to have a dashboard and do some A/B test and do some kind of recommendation or scoring. So you use a combination of these things. But to communicate this and solve the last mile problem, you need to have storytelling and visualization. And as you saw today, it's very important to have the number 0, the data informed and educated decision maker that is able to help the company to manage these projects, find problem solution fit, and later on communicate the results to the other stakeholders as well. So it's a very hybrid situation. Therefore, we've been using in our trainings a checklist. This is one of the frameworks we use, not because we want the teams to go through the checklist every time, but they have it as a guide for them to later on make this naturally. So they will try to map these tasks, projects, proof of concepts, minimum viable products from the linkage with the overall business strategy, the business question, the KPIs. Here you already have subsidies for your prioritization. Then you look at the involved stakeholders, you map the data that is available and desired to perform this project. Then how you are going to test it with each of those proof of concepts. And finally, you have the confidence checks here, how you're going to deliver and communicate this to the business. With this in mind, for each of the tasks that you have at hand, you will go back to the data priorities grid that I showed you before. And you can do this in a number of ways, including post-its in a wall or using a Miro board or some task management tool. But basically, you want to map here according to the priority and later on populate this with many ideas. And if you have infrastructure to share that does not make these other questions too costly, you can even populate some of the incremental improvements. If you want to, for example, read a bit about a real case from a large company, we have this example from Disney when they started to use these wristbands in the parks. This is the infrastructure that gave them the possibility to start unifying the data for every consumer and create defensive and offensive data strategies, and also have the ability to find out a number of key business questions that could be monetized or just used for improving products and processes. It's a very good example to understand what we discussed in this webinar, the left side of our iteration process. In other webinars, we discuss the other components, teams, operationalization, governance, but today we looked at these items over here. Next, we are going to just look at our, let's say, learning goals or your takeaways. We started today just reviewing one of the concepts that we repeat in many of our webinars, the need for a data strategy. It doesn't need to be a full document. You just need to have a procedure to prioritize and understand the contributors of your system, at least initially. You need to have specific criteria for your business, what makes a question a key business question, so you can prioritize the right initiatives to create momentum and develop the maturity and the culture. We didn't discuss in much detail, but we talked about the data teams, the core wranglers, and especially the role of the number 0, the decision maker that helps the company to prioritize. And finally, you also got a glance of how the left side of your iteration process, the data strategy, will allow you to have a better sense of which capabilities to build next in terms of infrastructure and also in terms of team roles. Thanks for joining us today. Hope this was a good contribution to your understanding of how to prioritize your data projects and overall how to support your overall data strategy and your business strategy. I'll see you in the next webinar.